Here we are on the Legion Committee.
Yeah. How I do it.
It's so fun here, and it's still March 11th, and it's Wednesday, and it's 2:30. And I think the next thing we're gonna do right before we jump to a conversation about school construction is a vote on H 757. I believe we need to amend it and then vote on the bill as amended.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would move that we adopt amendment version draft 1.1 on 757.
Thank you. Representative Kimball moves that we amend H 757.
Second.
Representative Burkhart seconds. Is there any?
The amendment, what did he do?
Oh,
It
yes.
goes to Charlie.
It was,
You know what, actually, I'm gonna. Let's withdraw the amendment. Let's withdraw the motion. Do you mind
Okay.
withdrawing the motion? Thank you.
Nice.
yes, Madam Chair, I would like to withdraw the previously offered amendment.
Let's wait to vote on this until tomorrow.
Actually, Jim.
Jim,
It was Jim's amendment.
Yeah.
you made the motion?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, can you mind withdrawing the motion?
We were clearly wrong, yes, ma'am. So I withdraw the amendment,
The motion.
the motion.
Okay, great,
That's
thanks. Do we have to vote to approve his withdrawal?
No, as long as the
Okay.
maker and the seconder.
I withdraw my second.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, we're just gonna wait until tomorrow.
Okay.
Great, okay.
Just put my name in. That's a little crazy.
Okay. Let us switch gears. It's school construction. Here we are. We've been talking about school debt, what to do about school debt in a scenario where a district's governance is combined. And that being sort of a leverage point for how to fund school construction under a foundation formula construct. John has some updated language for us that he can share with us. Treasurer's office has been thinking about this. The bond bank has been thinking about this. They're all still sitting on the bench from the last conversation we had, so they're going to talk to us. And I think that's all of my introduction. John, do you want to take us through the?
Sure, Dr. Sheriff, I can send that right now.
Oh, sorry. Can everyone just always copy source on all emails that go to me? Because I can't check things anymore. Good. Just for the next 2 weeks, you can stop after that.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, John, right?
John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I think I've been in here a good bit today, but not spoken. Fun.
Once you started that sentence, I thought, I wonder how the sentence is started.
I wondered the very same thing.
You put yourself on.
The same.
I often start sentences without knowing where they will go.
I have.
Just looking around.
Active thinking.
Is that what we're doing?
That's what I consider it. Okay. I have shared with Torsion, and I pulled up my PDF, so I'll go ahead and screen share. This is a pretty simple textual change. You will recall the prior debt service draft that you saw that just touched the state aid for school construction program and provided in 2 separate subdivisions that a school district that receives final approval for school construction aid shall be eligible to receive construction aid of 100% of the eligible debt service cost. And in the prior version, I'll get to this in a second, but in the prior version, there was a separate subdivision that said that any school construction debt that existed prior to December 31, 2025 would receive 100% aid. That's still captured, but it's captured in a different section now because that category has been expanded. If you think of that as the clearing the slate, which I will show you in just a second. So what you have now is a new section 3, and I'm going to explain why I pulled it from the school construction section and just added it in here. This would be a new section of statute in chapter 133, your state aid for, this is your public funding of education, a new section for legacy debt aid. And this is just expanding beyond purely capital debt to say that all debt for school districts that exist prior to a particular date, in this case, December 31, 2025, would be eligible to receive 100% of debt service costs. So this may not broadly expand. I don't know what the extent of school district debt beyond capital indebtedness is, but this is a broader kind of clearing the slate. If school districts have existing debt, then it would be eligible to receive 100% of debt service costs. It's subject to the same mechanism here. It would be annually awarded for annual debt service costs, subject to a similar cap as you saw in the previous section and we talked about before, and subject to an annual appropriation. There's a couple things I would flag about this. While this would capture all of your capital indebtedness, it doesn't take a position on what debt is, right? So you could have questions as to what sorts of liabilities fall within this. Do contractual commitments fall within debt? Is it anything that you owe to someone? Does that constitute debt? Would that be picked up? So I think that's an outstanding question with the way that this is drafted, but this is just a simple provision to say broader debt service costs clearing the slate. And I don't know the extent of how much this would expand beyond capital indebtedness for schools.
So one thing that we talked about last time we were here was this idea is that there might be debt from, say, an outstanding case.
Yes.
But it might be too inclusive.
It could be too inclusive.
Define debt further.
Exactly. So this draft doesn't take a position on what should constitute debt. And I just wanted to raise to you guys that when you think through this question, we should think about what all the things you want to capture in that are. This uses the most capacious term. I mean, I guess you could use liabilities. Actually, it could be even broader. The one thing I would note about the existing language is because it does award aid in the form of annual debt service costs, that seems to contemplate that it would only go toward things that would be built out as principal and interest payments. So that might exclude contractual commitments and the like, but just to say, this is something for discussion. What sorts of things do you want to clear the slate for? That is all that I have. And I should say, the reason that I moved the subdivision previously that had existing capital debt out of the school construction section is that it is a kind of legacy debt. You now have a provision for all kinds of legacy debt, right? And unlike the other school construction projects that have to go through the state aid program, the proposal for that legacy debt for school construction is not that it would have to go through the state aid program. So I think conceptually, it makes more sense to group in old capital indebtedness for school construction projects like any other legacy debt. You could, of course, take a different approach, but that's why I drafted it in this way.
And this would not create like a rush on debt, which I find impossible to imagine, but just if that was possible, because it has
The cutoff.
It has a cutoff at.
But just so I'm clear, this would mean that previous projects, 100% of them would basically, what's left to be paid off would be financed by the state. Whereas all future projects are going to have to go through a fairly stringent process of, whatever the rules are about square footage per student, what's included or not included in a capital construction project. So there's a difference in how we're treating projects that were approved before we reinstated state aid and projects that are instated after.
That's right. And the easiest way to point to it textually is that the lead-in for subdivision A here is a school district that receives final approval for construction aid shall be eligible to receive, right? So it's those that are pursuing projects in the future have to go through this process. This other section is just speaking to legacy debt.
And I don't necessarily think this is a good idea. I think it's a place for us to start adding more things to it to build what needs to be both a like a plan for debt service and a plan for new school construction. And this seems like one piece of maybe like a 5-part puzzle. So I guess one thing is I think it would be helpful for someone to volunteer to figure out if we want to define debt and how we want to define it. If anyone wants to volunteer for that task.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Okay.
I also have a question, and then I may be creating work myself as well. I also have a question.
That's what we're doing this week.
Other question about, are there other states in recent memory that have gone through this process of instating? I know that most states have state aid for school construction. Are there any recent examples of folks that have had to deal with this legacy debt issue as they reinstated? I guess it's really the combination of reinstating state aid at the same time that we're changing the whole school funding system, which is different than pretty much any place. I was just wondering if there's any example of other people and what they've done, but it sounds like we're in a fairly unique position.
Yeah, I don't off the top of my head know the answer to that, but I can look into that and try to see how other states approach legacy debt.
Also, with a foundation formula that does not have really an allocation for school debt, this does not say where the categorical grant to cover it is coming from.
Correct.
It could still conceivably be coming from the education fund unless another source of funds is identified.
If this doesn't take a position, in some ways, while this looks super simple, it's very scary to me personally to draft things like this because I can't logic my way through any, there's so many unresolved things that there's just not much for me to build out. Yes, this doesn't take a position on where the revenue source is. The provisions that I would say take into consideration that fact are including an annual cap, right? So there is some consideration of trying to limit the exposure that you might have for this and then subjecting to annual appropriation. It would be, even if you didn't include that language, but there's doubly clear language to say that you wouldn't be overcommitting the state beyond what could be provided.
The other thing I just want to add in looking at Vermont's particular case, because of our statewide education property tax, many communities feel like they don't have any more tax capacity to support a local construction project. And right now, the way it's working is that other school construction projects are supported by everybody's property tax. So it's really kind of funky that way. So, in other states, there might be a general fund allocation towards part of what that school debt may be, but the rest of it is relying on the school district. So when we have a statewide education property tax, it gets really weird to try to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the driving concerns in this space has been how to navigate that in a way that protects the credit of the state.
Yep.
And I think when we're done just sort of getting our head around this building block with John, we're going to ask Michael from the bond bank and the treasurer's office to sit up here together and have more of a roundtable discussion of sort of what other puzzle pieces might be that we want to bring into this. Yeah. Representative Gomes.
Just I think that's a real problem. It's actually the same problem with TIP, right? The overlaying authority is not the same as the unit that benefits. And so there's weird asymmetry potentially. But I guess I'm curious again, can we start by defining what problem we're trying to solve here? Because I think that matters a lot. And historically, when you have a brand new building, you're carrying debt on your books. If you have a very deteriorated building, it's a depreciated asset, it's a form of debt. And we say there's no value, but there are a lot of people who are also rushing to transfer their small school buildings to the municipality right now, even though they were built with ed fund money. So these buildings do have value, even though I wonder if I'm just not sure why you would give carte blanche to people who were able to go out, especially given some of the constraints, when what they've really done is just assume debt in a different form.
What would we do if we didn't do this?
It's really.
So I guess, sorry, I'm going to back up. So I think there are two separate problems that we're trying to solve. One problem we're trying to solve is what to do with existing district debt as we move to a foundation formula with a foundation formula that does not account for debt. There's possibly a happy second problem we're trying to solve that could be solved with similar tools, which is we absolutely need to find a way to both organize funding for school construction and fund school construction.
I guess I'm gonna go back again. I'm trying to figure out what problem we're trying to solve, because I don't even know how you have this without language from House Education about what the purpose of future construction is. Because if the goal is to support development of regional high schools, then you actually don't want to reward backwards, you want to reward forwards. This is just a tool. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to understand our theory of governing, because I feel we're very incoherent. That's all.
Whether paying for past debt is rewarding or not rewarding, there's still past debt that needs to be managed somehow. And so I think one of the reasons that we're stopping sort of, there's a clear date here is so that it just is what it is, and it's not a reward or not a reward. It's just like, it's a debt that needs to be managed. But I hear what you're saying. And then there's the moving forward, which I think we're assuming is some version of regional high schools.
I don't know that we know that.
Okay,
We have no language.
yes. Representative Odie, did you have a question for John?
I did. It's a historical question. When we had state aid to education, was that general fund money?
Are you talking about, we used to do this through the capital bill? It would have been bonding at the time, right? It wouldn't have been through the ed fund.
So it wasn't in the ed fund, it was bonding
General obligation, yeah,
or thought.
yeah, used to go through the capital bill process for
And what year did that end again?
2007, 2008, around that time.
And before, I'm just trying to figure out how we did it before Act 6068,
Oh, you're saying way back.
or not that far back.
It's pretty far back before Act 60. It was before it was
Just after.
Shortly after.
I think that hurts. I don't know, to me, I'd like to know. So, do you remember?
I don't remember, I was a child. But
I do remember, Carol, and I mean, I can't remember where the money came from, but I remember general fund. But I don't know, if, where it came from after that.
I'd like to know.
Okay, so
We didn't
can,
have an ed fund,
it's possible to know.
only as the general fund, there was no ed fund.
No,
Until
it wasn't
60.
any fund, true. I just wonder, is it bonding, did it get general fund money? I just can't remember. I can remember.
I have a fun way we can find this out. I wonder if the NEA, who's very invested in school construction, can spend some time doing a history lesson on that and find out how we paid for school construction before.
Well, teachers teaching is my favorite.
I know, isn't that so fun?
It's very fun to me.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I'm gonna ask the three of you to come sit here, the two of you to sit here. Whatever you want to do, there are chairs. We don't usually do this way. We're gonna see how it goes. Colin, you're welcome to join in for the brainstorming too, but only if you do your homework assignment. I'm just kidding. You're welcome. I'm totally kidding. You're welcome to join brainstorm.
So I need to reference some numbers. Okay, that's kind of. Peter doesn't need it.
Yes.
We never been told.
Hey, Colin, if you look at the first school construction task force report, you could find the answer to the question.
I will do that. I think I know the answer.
Great.
Surprise.
You're welcome.
Michael Gahn, Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank. Peter Trombley, Office State Treasurer.
So we just have all these puzzle pieces and I'm trying to put them all in the middle of the table. This is not usually how we develop legislation, but everything goes this year. So we have some problems we're trying to solve. in different ways. We have debt capacity, maybe. We have the credit rating of the state. We have lots of work that's been done about what our district debt looks like right now. So let's all talk.
I can answer some of the questions that were out there.
Thank you.
So just to respond to some of the things and make sure you get leases, I'd say probably most importantly in the definition of capital debt. They're going to look a little differently. Under GASB standards, basically anything that remotely smells like debt is now needs to be classified as debt. And the audit's going to be a good place to look. There are questions and new rules around sort of like software as a service. And so that might be something that you might need to consider also. And also there are some VMers legacy.
Sorry, you said software as a service is considered?
Yeah, under it's considered a long, yeah, it
It's a
doesn't,
long-term obligation.
like everything.
Because you're like dug in on this product that you've,
Yeah, that's
Integrated in.
that's some new GASB rules. It's just like quite comprehensive. So I think you're, you know, and then there are some districts that have legacy VMers requirements. So just to inform that discussion.
Kristen, what did you have a
I
question?
need, I need this backed up, please, and start again, because I'm writing capital debt and it looks like debt is counted as debt and all of a sudden we're into class.
The capital, yeah, if you're focused on capital, I'm just saying what sort of like our liabilities or obligations under the GASB standards, which is the accounting standard for governments and school districts. Each year it gets more comprehensive. But leases, and you know, leases are subject to appropriation. Equipment leases, things like that are going to be the most obvious, and then, you know, it gets a little bit murky from there.
Leases and equipment leases are.
Yeah, like-
Some of the things that can be considered.
Those are 100%. Yeah, those are 100%. But increasingly, it's become more and more comprehensive with some of the new standards.
So like the line between fiscal obligation and debt is, there's no line anymore. It's like the line between software as a service and software as a product, really.
Yeah, yeah, and now who knows?
That was a special gift for Charlie, but.
Oh yeah, and more. Yeah, the clock. Who knows? Any of those?
So in a nutshell, how would you say it in a nutshell?
He can say that in a nutshell. I don't need to say it in a nutshell.
Okay.
I think you want to look at the debt notes
Nutshell.
in the.
What are you trying to say? Because I want to make sure.
I just think your list of potential liabilities, to the point made earlier, is. I was just giving a heads up on some of the things to consider outside of debt service specifically.
Okay. All right, I'm done. So it's a very long list of liabilities outside of debt service.
That's right. Although the scale of them, you know, is obvious. The other thing I'd mention kind of as a follow-up to some of this discussion, to Representative Holcomb's point, the tasks, I forget what it's called, the advisory committee, I think that I'm on. I can't remember if it's a task group or an advisory committee.
I can never remember those
It's
things.
very difficult to keep it straight.
Yes. Do you know the
But
difference between the two? No, no one does.
well, I think we are formally a thing.
Advisory board.
Advisory board, there you go. That's, I think, why I'm getting so confused. You know, there was some commentary on that sort of knowing the direction that the state wanted to go on facilities would be helpful. I think one of Rhode Island's thing was like fewer and newer, for example, as a talking point. And so designing a program around how you do that prioritization was something that did come up in the discussions previously. But clearly, I think bigger picture, like we have a huge deferred maintenance need, and we've been very focused on that for a long time. And then I guess the last thing I'd say to the committee is, I think, to what Representative Kimball was saying, you know, other states that have this don't have so many constraints in terms of wanting to cap spending and have, you know, 95 to 100% of the funding come from the state. So they always have kind of a release valve in local property taxes. And we just don't have that in this circumstance, and that really kind of boxes us in quite a bit, and is why I think we're having this discussion about these very high levels of state aid. That's.
Thank you. That's a great place to start.
As we were talking about the capacity of the state to take on a lot of new school construction projects, even though we don't have the prioritization at this point, we know there's $6.2 million in identified school projects just to bring them up to what, to not replace, but actually just fix up, like, is what the study was. So the question is, what kind of capacity, we've had these conversations, but what kind of capacity does the state have? A borrowing capacity, or is it the school district liability that has to be taken on? Can't just the state borrow the money? So I just throw it to you that way, telling a couple of the answers.
So whether the state, so I'll say as we read the language that John just walked us all through. And I want to confirm this because we haven't had this specific language to put to our advisors yet. But given that the state would be under this circumstance appropriating annually the payments to the school districts, both for legacy debt and for future construction, it would not, in that case, count as net tax support debt for the state because it'd be subject to annual appropriations. If the state were to bond directly in order to support some of these projects going forward, right now, the CDAC recommends the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee for the state has had us at a recommendation of 50 million a year in bonding, 100 million per biennium. We asked them to run a few scenarios to see how much higher we could go, and we could long-term go out to 100 million a year, 200 million per biennium without realistically risking our state's credit score. That's with an additional fiscal years 27 through 23. We could also do an additional, I think, 23.1 million per year to make up for some authorized but unissued debt in the past. So one of the challenges that the state has faced in actually utilizing its debt is that our capital projects simply can't move forward due to labor shortages or material shortages in recent years. So that's assuming we're now dedicating our capital debt towards a new purpose that could move forward. We have some previously issued debt we could use over the next 5 years as well. So the short answer is, in the next 5 years, we could do about 73 million more a year in bonding and long-term 50 million more a year in bonding.
Okay, thank you. And then just for the sake of argument, if you went out to bond, interest still has to be paid on the bond. So you're thinking that would be coming from the general fund or that would be coming from the education fund?
That would be a policy decision for the legislature.
Good
But
answer.
That's a good answer. In the past, when the state, when the treasurer used to, from the capital budget, say it was 20% of school funding, if it was 20 million a year, let's just say that. In the past, was the general fund that was repaying that bonding from the capital debt when the funds were then allocated to the schools?
I don't actually know in our legacy school construction aid program where
It's general fund.
general fund, but typically with our GO bonds, it's general fund or general obligation bonds.
It's definitely general fund.
Historically.
Yeah.
Possible, yeah. And we bonded it was a small proportion.
Yes. And then on the bond bank side, our capacity is not as constrained. We don't think we threaten our rating with several $1 billion worth of issuance because of the benefit of the state intercept. I think as we approach this future state, maintaining the underlying general obligation of that local bond is important for this. I think there's a known unknown about the way the rating agencies will perceive this new structure, but having the general obligation, should there be any shortfall, is important in this overall framework to avoid it being net tax supported debt of the state and being on the bond bank's books.
I think in previous, I don't know if it was last year, last biennium, we learned a lot about sort of what Rhode Island and Massachusetts have done. Either Delaware, was it Delaware or Maryland?
So Maryland, couple with topics. So Massachusetts is a sales tax lien. Maryland, is whatever the counties or the districts, and then in Prince George, they did a
Prince George, can you tell us about what they did in Prince George?
Yeah, and I think it was Corvius in Prince George County. They had a large, Prince George County is huge, just like the size of Vermont. Well, it's probably bigger actually. And They had a huge deferred maintenance issue. They did a public-private partnership to bring on a private entity who then was, project finance is all about segregating risk. So like delivery risk, construction cost overrun risk, and all these things are sort of segregated out. And so they contracted to have a P3 to deliver these new schools at a set price and time with certain guidelines on design. And I think that's a model that has a lot of applicability in Vermont because we're so constrained in what we're going to allow the district to do. Having a design build type mechanism where we say, we want this program, we want to have multiple sections that can be accommodated in the school, we want this solar orientation, we want this, and then district has a fixed amount that they contribute to that, and then any sort of like management of the cost or risk is then borne in some way by the state that maybe is passed off to private partners. But we maintain the financing with the bond bank because it's always going to be less expensive than its private cost of capital.
Representative Bodie?
So I am aware of universities using public-private partnerships.
Yeah, sure.
to build And being able to segregate that debt. And then more recently, Moody's and Standard & Poor's said, we are counting that as debt against the universities.
Yeah, it really just depends on how it's structured. A lot of the P3s in the in the university space have been like parking and housing. And the nature of the housing commitment in particular is a source of consideration for the rating agencies, how extensive that commitment is to fill those beds. So that's where sometimes they get in trouble with that. I'm not suggesting that we would try to offload it from a balance sheet perspective, but more so that we would use private parties contracting at scale, a couple $2 billion, to deliver the schools or the new construction portion of this equation in ways in which we offload some of that risk as a state.
Thank you.
So there's no constraint from what you're saying on going to the market to raise money for new school construction, as long as it's the school districts who are the borrowers.
I think there's a known unknown with that about how it will be treated in the rating agencies, but assuming current state, yes. However, obviously that has to be paid back. And so that's
Looking at the consistency and stability of the repayment source.
yeah.
If it's not the school district's taxpayers and it's the state with the general fund's annual commitment to the debt service, then it's going to be not reflective on the state rating agency, but just the willingness of the legislature to commit that money.
Yeah.
That's how it works in Rhode Island.
Yeah, and I think an example I shared is Kentucky has this school construction facilities authority, something like that. They contribute, a certain percent to the cost of construction, and then it's sort of aggregated at a school level, and they consider that net tax supported debt, that contribution. The state does themselves, even though they aren't the ones doing the bonding. And so that's an entirely plausible scenario. We just don't really know. So I think we should just sort of like protect ourselves and do what we think is right.
I think there's some trade-offs on sort of the decision to have districts carry legacy debt and then the state essentially being responsible for paying those districts so they can pay that debt rather than paying off the debt and starting fresh. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I'm not sure I followed the distinction there.
So if we put sort of different puzzle pieces together and we have an opportunity to sorry, it's like the day has been too many different things at once. Okay, so we have legacy debt that's sitting at the district level. Right now, the language we have in front of us, which is just one piece of the puzzle, would essentially tell districts that we're going to be paying them so that the ed fund will be paying them in a categorical grant so that they can pay their debt going forward. The education fund, if it is the education fund that does that, will then have less money to do something else with, like pay for new school construction, which we might then bond for at the state level to pay for some of it. Is there, like, what are the trade-offs we should be thinking through about sort of carrying that legacy debt at the municipal, at the district level versus paying it off and sort of starting with new debt at the district level? Like,
Yeah, I think we should just keep it as is, because like, for example, we locked in a lot of that in, 2021, 2022. We have like 2.5% coupons on some of those long dated bonds, and like it just like that is, that's a great deal. Like we wouldn't want to sort of like screw that up. So, and then it's, and then if we try to do something else, we're either gonna have to come up with big appropriation, or it's like very obviously going to be part of net tax supported debt of the state. So I think your thinking around baking it into the foundation part was a good thought.
and I know that when we've looked at some of the numbers before, there's something of sort of like clumps of debt. We have some like old debt that will be paid off fairly soon. We have some newer, larger debt that's sort of sat like. Does it make sense to treat those differently in some way?
Yeah, I just set that up. So you have the debt that is outstanding that was issued prior to, say, I don't know, pick a year. 2020 is 125 million. You have with Burlington around 481 million outstanding currently. That's obviously going to change soon. But just to give you some rough orders of magnitude there.
In the committees or the test or whatever it was called, the discussions, did you look at any states? I mean, the examples of states that you gave are all states that allow local revenues to cover bonding. Did you look at any states that are as tight or capping as much as ours?
I have not been able to find anything that resembles Vermont in my research. Yeah.
What are the risks? I mean, I'm thinking my area, there's a school going out with a capital campaign to raise revenue alternatively. What are the risks for us of approaching it this way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's why I've sort of been like conceiving of this Prince George County model where you have a P3, because the risk is that like you have nowhere to go with any cost overruns. And you are extremely constrained, and really what you're asking voters to do is just how you want to arrange the pieces within the bucket. And so how do you cover the sort of risk? What's your risk management strategy? And so I think there has to be another entity that can ensure delivery at the cost that you can do within your constrained bucket. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I also think in Maryland, from what I understand, they can raise revenues locally, including the municipal government, to pay for school bonding as well. I mean, so I'm wondering, we've always had this assumption of separation of church and state, schools and municipal, but this, I'm just wondering what we're setting up here.
Yeah, it's very, I think the only parallel is you do have states, Massachusetts being one of them, that have like tax bill of rights type things where they have a cap on the amount of property tax increases that are allowed without some sort of referendum. And so that's like the closest parallel.
Even there are other cases, like in Rhode Island, I think some of the municipalities were borrowing the money and lending it to the school system.
That's what I was in a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's a work now.
And that might exist in other states.
It exists in Maryland.
This may not fall within, one piece of the puzzle, but I was just thinking, in one of my town meetings, they were asking me in regards to, it appears that they were gonna put, let's say, $100,000 into a capital reserve for possibly a new roof down the road. And they were asking me, how would that be worked out if for some reason the school had to be combined with a different school? So would that debt that they incurred, would that be legacy debt, or would that be some other just another form of debt that would be included in the new district?
I think that's the only experience we have is the historic experience for a consolidation, and then it just it followed the new legal entity. But the advisory group, thank you, did lay out, a number of different options for how you treat that.
And then just to follow up, so they were asking me also about,
I think there's a question of like, what is maintenance and what is construction, even if that construction's on existing buildings?
I think I heard you say that most all of it is considered debt, right? I mean, regardless.
Yeah, not deferred maintenance. There isn't a standard for that right now yet, but
I think a lot of districts also use that initial reserves. They build up a reserve to do an initial payment.
Yeah.
That's what happened locally. But here we pay for 100% of it if you did it a couple of years ago, but you would lose that revenue if you merge now.
Again, to follow up the other question they had, and is it still in the bill in regards to if that was to happen, the towns can buy the building back for $1? Or,
That seems to be what towns are doing.
I'm sorry?
I mean, towns are doing that right now, all over the city.
But again, I think that in this whole equation has to be some consideration for towns as well, because they aren't gonna sit there with a building, in some of my communities, that's a huge mammoth of a building, and what if, they still have to maintain it, they still have to put the new roof on it, they still, but they aren't gonna sell it to anybody that I know of. So I guess I'm just saying that somehow we need to consider that aspect of what a town's gonna have to go through to keep that building maintained or sell it for complete loss. And where does that money go? Is that going to municipals' coffers or?
Well, before the break, Representative Odie talked about working on a way of sort of using something like the downtown and village center tax credits to help those properties transform into what's next step. I think Representative Holcomb made a really good point about like, should that, and I don't want to speak for you, but like, should that be the municipality's building? Like, does it actually belong to the education fund? And so it's actually all of our, so selling it as for $1 to the town is maybe, not fair to all the taxpayers that paid to make that building all over the state, right? So I think that's something that we need to figure out.
I think that's a really good point. The bond bank wears both hats, right? So like, we don't want that community to be hollowed out without that education asset. And I think there is there's like a very, I think, substantive discussion of a land bank that could be, and this could be an interesting use for that. Some of the sites, maybe some of the sites are appropriate for new construction. Maybe some of the sites aren't. Maybe some of our sites are appropriate for housing. Maybe some aren't. And that's a great use of a land bank and bring some additional capacity to that community.
Some of the sites may have some contaminants.
Yes.
Talking about,
Unfortunately, yes.
maybe nobody wants.
Right.
Go ahead.
I know we're sort of on the record here and it's not the appropriate place to be like really bold, but I just like,
Anymore.
okay. I just look at the constraints we have and like, I don't know how you solve this problem. So like, I feel like what you really need, like the only thing you can really do is ask the community or that school district to commit to X% of the budget towards debt service so that you don't have to like extra pay into debt service, right? So like whatever bucket you're going to give the schools with the foundation formula, you sort of need to say, okay, like your skin in the game is going to be whatever percent we want to decide is appropriate. The national benchmarks that we look at from Moody's is like 5.5%, 6% budget. So we say, okay, well, if you community vote to dedicate 6% of your budget to this plus some reserve or like whatever, then we state or state entity or authority or whatever, we will help you procure the new facilities and we will manage the risk aspects of that. And we will help you deliver that at the lowest cost possible with goals that are determined more sections per grade, per cohort, big enough scale to have languages, et cetera. And then we will put that amount that and you will give us our GO. You'll give 5 to 7% plus your GO. And then we will bond against that, create a pot of money that we will then use towards whatever authority state to determine when and where the schools go and basic designs of what they look like. Well, what I think you can't do is say like, you then go design, bid, build each school within this constrained bucket and you manage all the risks and everything else, but we don't give you any flexibility to go outside this bucket that we're giving you. So I think you kind of have, like in your fiscal constraint, you've already made sort of a decision that you're going to have consolidated procurement and delivery, but you still should have some local contribution, I believe. So I think that's the only way this can really go, I guess, after spending a lot of time thinking about it. Because unless you were to say, for purposes of school construction, you can levy taxes above and beyond that 5% budgetary flexibility that you'd already agreed to.
And I think I'm like, the concern that sort of sits with that idea is that we have so much inequity right now in districts' willingness to raise revenue for schools. And that we are moving in some areas and moving towards in other areas a real emergency situation with our buildings, right? And so if we enable that and some districts are able to pass those bonds and some districts, I really have a perfect topic table right here. And some districts are not able to pass those bonds, what does that mean for the equity of opportunity in this state? Because we already have sort of proof that some districts are going to do that school construction and some districts are not. If it's up to the sort of local taxpayers' willingness to carry that.
Yeah, so the
Increase
scenario,
that
I suppose the scenario you envision is that folks would actually budget below whatever the foundation formula is or something, or.
No, that it would be a categorical grant on top of the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the other states have managed that by the level of aid that they provide. So, yeah.
I'm just gonna say again, we can fix this anytime with the floor. We're choosing to.
The what?
A floor, floor. When the novelty of Act 60, when it first went through, and then 68, is by the minimum tax rate actually set a floor on spending. And districts, some of them, like I know one near me, almost doubled what it had to spend.
Reasons. I don't understand why we don't set the floor now to help Slate Valley and Berry City. Why do those kids have to wait till 2020, whatever?
I think that's a great question. I think it's not the one we're talking about right now. And I'm just
But
like,
it's so important.
I understand it's so important. This school construction is the piece that like over and over again, all of our communities are asking us to solve this problem. And we don't have a clear bill in front of us to solve this problem. And so I'm hoping maybe just putting everyone together in a room, people would just
Like it.
And I really appreciate that you're like, we're on the record, but I'm just going in on it, right? Like, we have to figure this out. So, and we like, I just want to like spend the full 30 minutes trying to figure it out before we give up.
So we need a plan. We
I'm
need.
not saying we're going to give up. I'm just saying like, can we at least try to spend like everyone all in for 30 minutes on
I
it?
think that's what we think we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So Ohio, just for giggles, looking at them, they have a state and local split depending on the adjusted valuation per pupil. And they use like the district's taxable property, the average income, the average daily membership, and the state median income. Looking at these different variables to determine what would be a local share and what would be the state share. I don't know, and that was really to address the same kind of inequity issues we think about with Brigham and how that affected it. Is that, you think that's workable? I mean,
I think they still have the property tax base.
They
So
do. They do.
grew up in Ohio, kind of middle income family, but like my area of this wealthiest school district in the state was gerrymandered to have the mall, the biggest mall, one of the biggest malls in the state to create that additional value for this wealthy school district. So like Ohio is very much a property tax based system.
Okay. Yeah, so
And
still.
probably with a lot of inequities between the schools.
Yeah, that was it was a Supreme Court case in Ohio that sort of paved the way for their reform in the late 90s, I think, similar era to ours.
I'm just gonna say also, I think this is where I go back to, we need education policy to inform the finding the funding policy and the construction policy, because some of the districts that are voting down their budgets actually have a lower budget than the previous year, a lower tax rate. This is a very well documented phenomenon. Some people will always vote their budgets down. So it's not that there isn't access to resources, it's that locals are making a different choice. So I think if we don't have a decision, a policy that says at a minimum, kids need to have a building that doesn't have PCBs in it or whatever it is, then I don't know how to move this conversation. And if we do have an emergency, people, and I'm open to the conversation, but, giving 100% funding to people who made a decision a couple of years ago, when we have such extraordinary needs, and the people who didn't move forward are probably people who didn't have access to some of the capital. I think we would want to have better information about the impact of that decision before making that decision.
Sure. And so I guess then the next question is what is the next step for the districts that have not had access to that? How are we going to fund schools in those areas where they have not been able to bond historically?
And we don't even know what the education policy is. So I think, again, and this goes back to the regional high school thing, and I think our need is greatest at that level. And it's not always where people think it is. And so I think if we make that decision, it would be better to me if it was an evidence-informed decision that was supported by coherent policy.
And I've heard over and over again in this building, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, that we can't move forward on education policy unless we have solved school construction, because no one can trust that we'll have the needs for whatever that policy is. And so we're trying to do everything at once. I really hear where you're coming from. That makes sense to me.
I mean, and so whether we have 6 billion or not depends a lot on what we think the future looks like.
I want to make a comment.
Yes.
Follow up on something that you said. The comment is, one of the basic things would be health and safety of the students. If you get kicked out of the building, you have no choice. And if cities around you don't want to take you and combine with you, you have no choice and you have no building. So it's not like people woke up one day and said, well, let's build a new high school. We were on a course in our city to renovate, which really in many ways, thank goodness we didn't, because there was so much bad stuff in the building. We would have taken down the first wall and probably found so many PCBs what we have done. So it wasn't, so I just think there's an element of no choice when you have an unhealthy building or no choice when you're kicked out of your building. That's number one. Number two, I often think when you're doing a strategic plan, you're doing a strategic plan, you have to know what your vision and mission is. And I think you said earlier, is it newer and fewer? Is it, what is it? So if we were to say newer and fewer, and we were to say the health and safety of the people who work in and who are educated in the building, would those be something that would be guiding principles, which would somewhat answer hopefully what Representative Holcomb is talking about?
Well, I think that both the treasurer's office and the bond bank serving on the school construction advisory, whatever the last thing was.
State for School Construction Advisory Board.
Put forward those exact guidelines that were adapted into law in Act 73. And so those are pretty comprehensive guidelines for when and how.
So we do have that. I thought you were saying we need that.
I think there's still some questions with the advisory board about what exactly that direction is. Because that's really
Tell me what you think the direction, what did you put in what do you think you put in the report, and what more direction do you need? Because maybe we could at least solve that, so we know the vision and mission here.
I'm not the education expert. I'm the bond and construction delivery person. So not my field.
I think we are at the bell, so we're going to go to the floor. I'm going to encourage everyone to read the last report, and then we're going to all have this conversation again with an eye towards financing mechanisms. Thank you both so much.
Shirley sent us.
I don't know what Charlie sent.
No, not for.
Charlie will send this one too.
I'll send
If
this
you
one.
email them today. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, see you tomorrow morning at 9.